Good afternoon. Hi. Good afternoon. If everyone would come in and have a seat, we'll get started. Still test. Okay, hold on. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's program on low-hanging fruit, energy efficiency in the Southeast. This is the second program in the Clean Energy Speaker Series. We kicked this series off in November with two analysts from the Energy Information Administration who came and talked to us about energy demand in the Southeast for the next 20 years. So we're beginning today and going forward, we're examining the issues of energy supply and conservation as a means of meeting some of the demand, the future demand in this region. I'd like to welcome all of you, and I think there are some elected officials, maybe members of the Public Service Commission and other elected officials present, and I'd like to recognize you and especially welcome you to today's program and ask you in the future to bring your staffs. Be great to have members of your staff present so they can participate in this discussion about clean energy. I'm Ben Hill. I'm with the ATDC, which is a technology development program here at Georgia Tech. We're part of the Enterprise Innovation Institute, which is Georgia Tech's economic outreach and development organization. The Innovation Institute is a sponsor of this program, for which we're grateful. We have another principal sponsor, and that is Sutherland, the law firm Sutherland, which has its roots here in Atlanta. It's an international law firm of over 400 attorneys, which has an active practice in clean energy and clean technology. Tom Warren, who is the partner on sustainability, will be talking shortly and will provide some remarks about Sutherland as well as introduce today's speakers. So give them just a sec, okay? I'd also like to thank some other organizations that are helping make this program series possible. The Georgia Tech Sustainable Energy Institute, the Georgia Tech Brooke Byers Institute for Sustainable Systems, and Georgia Tech's Office of or Sustainability Office. I'd also like to recognize the advisors to the Clean Energy Speaker Series. We've got a great group of advisors who are instrumental in program and design and finding and assisting in finding speakers for this series. Marilyn Brown, who's a professor of public policy, who will be speaking today, is an advisor. Valerie Thomas, who's a professor in industrial systems engineering, is an advisor and will be leading and facilitating the discussion on biomass. David Scholl, who's the Georgia Research Alliance eminent scholar in sustainable energy, and Jay Hakes, who is the director of the Carter Presidential Center and former administrator of the Energy Information Administration, is an advisor. You can find out more information about our advisors as well as today's program, past programs, and upcoming programs by going to our website, scleanenergy.org. And if you're interested in participating in future programs and getting on our mailing list, go to the website and sign up, and we'll be sending you email announcements. The format of today's presentation consists of discussion presentations by our three distinguished panelists, followed by a Q&A period. And for those of you joining us over the web, I would ask that you send your questions to me as an email at ben.hill@gatech.edu. So if you're on the web, send your questions to me, ben.hill@gatech.edu. I'd like to note our next program, where in February and March, the Clean Energy Speaker Series will focus on biomass in the Southeast, resources, economics, technology, and public policy. And Valerie Thomas is going to be facilitating those two sessions in February and March. The February program will be the last Wednesday of February, February 24th, in this room. Okay. So thank you again for being here. Be sure to spread the word among your colleagues about this series. We've got a great turnout today. Look forward to your continued participation. And I'd like to introduce or turn the program over to Tom Warren.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. I'd like to just briefly introduce Sutherland. As Ben did, we have a very robust renewable energy practice as part of our larger 50-plus lawyer energy group. We represent a number of companies in the development, investment in, and purchasing of power from renewable energy facilities in the Southeast and across the country. And we're very excited to host this forum for an analysis of resources in the Southeast for renewable energy. I'd like to introduce our three speakers today. All three speakers have very extensive experience, and you have their bios from the materials. So I'm going to give an abbreviated introduction of each of the three of them to hit a few of the high points. First will be Skip Laitner, a director of economic and social analysis for the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. Prior to that, he served for almost 10 years with the EPA as a senior economist for technology policy. And he's left to focus on his research on energy efficiency resources for use in energy and climate policy analyses. In 1998, Skip was awarded the EPA's Gold Medal for work with a team of other economists to evaluate the impact of different strategies to assist in the implementation of greenhouse gas reduction policies. Skip has nearly 40 years of experience in environmental and energy policy arenas. Next is Kenneth Ostrowski. He's a director with McKinsey's Atlanta office. He has over 26 years of consulting experience and leads their North American power and natural gas practice. In addition to his extensive energy industry experience, he's co-authored a report, Reducing the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Emissions, How Much at What Cost, and Unlocking Energy Efficiency in the U.S. Economy. Then last, Marilyn Brown, a distinguished professor here at Georgia Tech, joined Georgia Tech in 2006 after a distinguished career at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where she led several national studies of climate change technology and policy options. She teaches courses now on energy policy and technology in both the undergraduate and the graduate schools, has extensive awards and publications, serves on the board of directors of the Alliance to Save Energy, the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, and others. And among her awards is she was a co-recipient of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. I'd like to introduce Mr. Laitner to start us off.
Thank you, Tom and Ben. A delight to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. It's especially a pleasure to work with Marilyn any chance I get and to renew some conversation with Ken. And Jay, I've got your book on my Amazon Kindle. I recommend the book that Jay has released just in the last year and a half or so. But good to see you again. We had the chance of working together in the Clinton administration in various capacities. In the short time I've got with you, how to think about my presentation here? Well, I'm following the mandate of Valerie, who said, open it up. And I decided, what the heck, I knew Ken's going to do a very good job of laying the groundwork for the possibilities for the next decade or so. McKinsey's done some really important work in that area. And I thought, what the heck, I would take it out past 2020, 2030, and hence the title, Energy efficiency, imagine the possibilities. Let me begin with a comment. Physicist and emeritus professor at Princeton, John Wheeler, you may not know him, but you may know the phrase he coined, black hole. He's the man who coined that phrase. And almost 35 years ago, I first came across his work. He was responding to a bunch of questions from reporters. How the heck are you coming up with some of these strange ideas in the netherworld of microelectronics and quantum physics? And he simply said, we shape the world by the questions we ask. You stop and think about it. If we're not asking better questions or even the right questions, we're going to be ending up with considerably less than better answers that may really help us move along a path. But with that as a backdrop, let me give you my sense of what energy efficiency investments are all about, a working definition, if you will. I define efficiency investments as the cost-effective investment in the energy we don't use to produce our nation's goods and services. That's a hard thing for businesses and people to wrestle with, the energy we don't use to deliver the things that we really value in life. And there's some examples, yes, certainly the familiar things like electronic ballast, sensors, building, piping insulation, heat recovery systems, and the like. But it includes so much more if we take a step back and think about it. Information and communication technologies. Surprisingly, we use those to help exchange information, provide timely insights, data, if you will, to manage our businesses and what have you. But it turns out their secondary value has huge implications for energy productivity for our economy. So good investments there generate a return. And then things on the supply side, things like combined heat and power. We used to think of it as cogeneration, but with the technology today, you can ramp up and ramp down so much more easily. It really is an opportunity. Recycled energy systems with efficiencies of 70 to 90% compared to, say, the grid right now, which is averaging maybe 32%, an efficiency that's been essentially unchanged since 1960. So there's that possibility. And then we also ought to include investments in the more productive, what we refer to as the high value-added services that power structural change in our economy. The common denominator in all these examples is productive investment and informed behavior, and now increasingly enabled by things like smart materials, semiconductor technologies, technology systems, and infrastructures are all part of that equation. But with that as a backdrop, an opening commentary. I think if we really take a step back and look and really ask the question, we'll find out that efficiency is the farthest reaching, certainly the least polluting, and fastest growing success story of the last 40 years. It turns out that if we look at 1970, the 40-year period from 70 to 2010 is about the same 40-year period we've got to look at to 2050 to begin really wrestling with climate and energy issues in a very big way. Efficiency in all of its guises has provided about 75% of the new energy-related demands for goods and services. And new supply, those power plants, pipelines, what have you, only 25%. Efficiency has already been hard at work, and it's a highly invisible success story, and that's part of the problem, how to make the invisible much more visible. Now, at the same time, and I was just talking with Ken beforehand, we're in the midst of an economic quandary. Our economy is sluggish, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of hesitation about innovation and the like. And that causes us to step back. And yet the efficiency investments are perhaps the way to break through this logjam if we really stop and think about it, and then helps us address the things like the energy and climate imperatives and respond to things like demands from developing countries. So I certainly agree with Secretary Chu, who last year said science and technology can create much better choices. Absolutely right. But we won't get there unless we bring people and imagination back into the process in a very active way, hence the critical need for smart public policy. Now, some of you may know Clay Shirky, who is doing some really interesting work, insightful work on how the digital economy is affecting our lives. And his comment, I think, right on, a revolution doesn't happen when society adopts new tools. It happens when society adopts new behaviors, and I think that's the critical need for us. Let me give you a sense of the scale of the imperative. And this is going to look a little scary at first. But here we're looking at the U.S. energy consumption in quadrillion BTUs. The first, on the left-hand side, the historical trends on the left of that dotted line, is how energy has been used quantity-wise in the U.S. up till from 1990 to 2010. Now, our colleagues at the Energy Information Administration suggest that we're going to grow to about 125 quads by the year 2050. So there's going to be a steady growth in demand for energy. If we did not already put innovation to work, instead of 125 quads, we might be using more like 200 or 250 quads. So innovation is already going to help keep the demand for energy down to about 125 quads, more or less by 2050. But we have this critical issue of climate and energy imperative that absolutely requires us to think about becoming more productive in the way we use energy. And the suggestion is we should be getting down to around 65 quads by the year 2050. a long, steady investment, better informed businesses and behaviors can get that expanded level of innovation to work. It's a critical need. There is no economic, nor is there a physical law that says we can't do it. It requires motivation and smart policies to catalyze the movement ahead. So let me offer this insight, the idea of what I refer to as purposeful effort if we're going to respond to the imperatives that are now before us. And on the horizontal or the vertical axis here, we have the usual sorts of things: performance, productivity, and returns. And on the bottom axis, the x-axis, we have time. We tend to think of it as a fairly static process. And yeah, we've got standard technology, maybe a little bit of effort that's at work, and we might say we're somewhere on the curve. We haven't used up all of the available opportunities, but we've got a ways to go. But we've actually kind of tapped into that pretty hard. But instead of having a static view, we begin substituting not time, but cumulative investment, or what we might call purposeful effort. So then if we talk about the possibilities, we begin transforming the economy and shifting into a more productive gear. So we have things like smart grid, but even as equally interesting, smart infrastructure more broadly, new materials, new designs, semiconductor-enabled technologies, and the like. But new innovations, new social norms, if you will, and a new appreciation of possibilities are all required to leverage the full range of those opportunities and productive investments. So with that, let's take a step back. I'm going to look at buildings just as one example and explore some new possibilities that suggest a substantially larger scale if we choose to develop those. I'm doing some work with colleagues in Europe, in Rome and Utrecht and elsewhere, and one of the people that we're consulting with is Acciona. You may not know of them, but they are a very large construction firm, traditionally a standard construction firm that in recent years has decided to get big time into renewables and sustainability. In Spain, this is their headquarter buildings. It's a new building. They are zero carbon emitting building because they've done the right things, smart design, smart integration of systems in their buildings, and they power the rest of their energy needs entirely through renewables on site. That's an example of a possibility. But new buildings are such a small piece. What about building retrofits? Let me give you some ideas. One of my colleagues, also working with me in Rome, Gordon Gill, with Adrian Smith, Gordon Gill Architecture in Chicago, have been asked by the new owners of what used to be called the Sears Tower, now called the Willis Tower, a hog of an energy building, an incredibly wasteful energy building that is just draining resources. So they've been asked to take a look at a design. They're looking at a number of different things, perhaps hard to see, but many different little innovations. 80% savings on electricity, they're suggesting, if we make the right kind of investments. I'll give an example. Doing right things, we could be saving something like 10 million light bulbs a year in that building alone, just because we're using smarter technology. Now, what's really interesting about this is not the Willis Tower itself. What Gordon is talking about is building a new facility right next to it, a new building that allows synergy between two buildings. If we think of a building, we tend to lock out the possibilities because it's an isolated context. But if we think of it more as an ecosystem and begin integrating other elementary designs, now we can have an exchange of processes between buildings. They're putting in now the idea of vertical turbines so that they're learning how the wind and the updraft in buildings can drive power. A number of interesting things that might end up looking something like this if they can get the funding and they can pull it together. So it's a symbiotic catalyst, not just an isolated technology or isolated building, but an ecosystem or a symbiotic approach to retrofit. Deep savings are possible. But then what of historical building retrofits? Colleagues of mine, Luca Galafaro and Studio Ian Plus in Rome. Well, Rome is a historic city. They have a very vital central historic downtown, and they don't want to mess with that historical feature. It's critical to them. So what Luca is talking about, taking a building like this, maintaining the integrity of the structural shell, and then, much like the old Roman architecture of old, having wide open atrium, new apartments, new shops that have a higher level multi-layer exposure to sunlight with light, daylighting, and PV powering, and all of a sudden you have a new facility that can achieve some significant deep retrofits. But then we need to think more in a systems basis as well. So if we extend this, Pierre Neighbors, who's the CEO of Kima, based out of the Netherlands, I've shown this graph. You've seen perhaps ones like it, but we have buildings and other systems all interacting in an optimal way because of better communication technology, better design, and the like. These all can achieve deep savings, 80% or more of retrofit possibilities if we choose to step back and take a look. So the good news about the transition to a more energy productive and climate friendly economy, it doesn't have to be at all about ratcheting down our economy, and yet that's the hesitation, that's the worry that we all confront. Rather, we suggest it can be all about using innovation and our technological leadership, investing in more energy productive behavior, both behavior and technologies, including both existing and new opportunities, and developing new ways to make things, new ways to get where we want to go, or certainly where we want to work, and yes, even where we want to play. The opportunities, we think, for a robust, smart energy future are clearly there, but revolutions don't happen without people and without imagination. With that, thank you very much, and turn it over to Ken.
Well, thank you very much. It was a great presentation, Skip, and a great way to get us thinking and in the mood to talk even more about how do we drive forward on energy efficiency. And I just want to say, thank the Georgia Tech seminar series for giving me the opportunity to address you today, and it is a real privilege to be on the podium with Skip and Marilyn. I feel like I am the neophyte, the new joiner of the group, and when you look at what's been done in this arena, Marilyn and Skip clearly have been a couple of the leaders, and so whatever contribution McKinsey has made, we have truly been standing on the shoulder of giants. So we appreciate everything you've been doing in the area. What I wanted to do is just share with you some of the perspectives on energy efficiency that we have developed in our research, and I'm going to link it to some work we did. I'm sorry, I got the system down. I want to start with kind of how we got into this whole area. Some of you may be familiar with the work we did on greenhouse gas abatement, and we produced this curve. It's a bit stylized here. If I put all the detail on it, you certainly wouldn't be able to read it. But for those who are less familiar, what we did is we took the initiative during the debate on greenhouse gas to say, without passing judgment on the policy or the necessity or anything of that nature, we just wanted to answer a simple question that said, well, if we were going to pursue greenhouse gas abatement, what would it cost? And how much opportunity is there in the American economy or the U.S. economy to go after greenhouse gas abatement? So we created this curve, and each of those rectangles represented an opportunity, and we looked at the economics of it. But along the way, in releasing this report, we came up with this, what we call this paradox of energy efficiency. It's at the left side of the curve, where the boxes were actually below the line. And what that meant is that if you pursued these opportunities, not only did they reduce greenhouse gas, but they actually saved us money. They were actually cheaper, if you will, than the business as usual alternative. And that created a lot of stir and a lot of controversy. And in a funny way, it shouldn't have, because if you had read the materials that have been out there, people have been saying this for years. But somehow I think in putting it in this format, we captured a lot of attention and interest around it. And a lot of people challenged it and said, can't be. How can there be such a great opportunity that's just laying out there and it hasn't been captured already? It's that joke about, the $20 bill on the ground, why hasn't it gotten picked up and all that. So we decided to extend our research and focus just on that side of the curve. Now I definitely have it right. And we published two reports. So the first that I referred to was the report on greenhouse gas abatement, and then the second one that was released this past July is our look at energy efficiency within the U.S. And we did put the executive summary out there. Please feel free to grab a copy, and if there's any interest in reading deeper, it is available off our website for free, so you're more than welcome to go there. One other note I would add about the research is we didn't do it alone. We went out and had a group of sponsors that supported our efforts, and in addition to the sponsors that are listed, we had a wide network of people that contributed to the research and the perspectives developed. Locally, you'll notice that Southern Company was one of the sponsors of the research, and they weighed in quite heavily, gave us a lot of support, a lot of ideas and facts and challenges, and it was very constructive to pushing the effort forward. So with that, just to move to the conclusions of our work, what we basically, in a quick summary, identified is that energy efficiency offers a vast, low-cost energy resource, and the challenge is to come up with a comprehensive and innovative approach to unlock it. And I'll just say one thing on that. When we say a vast, low-cost energy resource, it's interesting to note, and Skip and I were talking about this, and he referenced the point, we did not come at this from a climate perspective. We were not looking at energy efficiency as a way of reducing greenhouse gas. We were looking at it from an economic perspective. We said, if this is so economically attractive, why aren't we doing it? And the first question we wanted to drive into was to understand those economics. So everything I'm going to show you, everything I talk about, are opportunities that are economic investments that will benefit the end users and society as a whole if we were to pursue them. There's a derivative effect, which is that we get reductions in greenhouse gas abatement as well, but you can do this purely because you're an economic optimizer and want to do what's right for the economy. So what we also identified, though, is that there are significant and persistent barriers that will need to be addressed if we're going to unlock the potential that is sitting in front of us. So we recognize there's a reason why it's not being captured, and we wanted to dive in depth into understanding what those barriers are and then begin to put some perspectives out there as to how you can unlock that. But just to identify the size of the prize, if we were to unlock those barriers, the savings potential is worth more than $1.2 trillion, and that would be the benefit. We would be required to invest approximately $520 billion to capture that. So you're looking at something roughly in the the $500 to $600 billion benefit to the society. So a huge economic benefit. This is looking out through 2020. Many of the opportunities would have lasting benefits beyond that. So we tried to be rather conservative just in framing the size of the opportunity. That translates into roughly a 23% reduction in projected demand. We've seen a number of studies. They tend to be in that range. We've looked at some that were, might suggest a much lower range, and then reconciled back to them. And when you adjust these studies for scope, and when you adjust them for some of the assumptions they make about how things could get replaced, the time frame, the cost, what you tend to find is that we're all working off basically the same data sets. And when you're talking about economic potential, we're all going to be pretty much in that range. When you get into a debate about what's going to get captured, that's a very different question. And then you can have different views based on how energetic and creative you believe we will be as a society to go after it. In addition to the 23% reduction, that translates to roughly 1.1 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions. To put what a gigaton is in perspective, that would be equivalent to the total emissions output of Germany in a year. So through energy efficiency, we could make a significant impact. If we captured that by 2020, one analysis we saw said that could get us about 80 to 85% of what was being called for at one point for U.S. reduction. So it could be a major portion of our journey toward greenhouse gas abatement. So let me just profile this in a bit more detail. In looking at the opportunity, let me put my glasses on to make sure I give you the right numbers as well. We saw that the opportunity could be broken down across a number of the fuel types. So we looked at electricity, we looked at gas, we looked at oil. So we looked at all the fuels. And what you see, if you read that top bar, end-use energy, which is sort of the way that consumers tend to measure it, and then we also accounted for it in primary energy terms. But if you looked at end-use energy first, what you see is that we could achieve a reduction in electricity consumption by approximately 26% by the year 2020. So that's 1080 terawatt hours. To put that in perspective, that is roughly equivalent to the total electricity consumption of Russia. So that's a lot of electricity that we could achieve in the U.S. through energy efficiency. On gas, we could get a 23% reduction. That's roughly equivalent to the total natural gas consumption in Canada, from the equivalent sources that we're looking at, stationary energy sources. 20% reduction in million barrel of oil equivalents. That's more than what we're producing in biofuels in the country. So these are large numbers. The scale is almost hard to imagine in terms of the magnitude of opportunity that we have in this country. We broke it out by region. This is done at the census level, so it's still somewhat aggregated. But just to give you a perspective of where the Southeast compares to other regions, if you look at the absolute total, the Southeast has the largest share of energy efficiency potential. If you go to that far right column, the Southeast represents, of 100% of the energy efficiency potential in the U.S., the Southeast is roughly 29% of that potential. It's interesting, if you look at it, though, as a percentage of how much energy would be consumed in that region, you see that actually it's somewhat consistent across all the regions, that all of the regions have roughly, in the low 20s on an aggregated basis, reduction potential. So that's what's somewhat interesting and exciting about this. It's not just like, a region that has the ability to produce wind power or solar power. It's every region. It's pervasive across our nation that we have the opportunity to address this. Now, the exact mix of opportunities and where that potential is will vary across regions. So you see the Southeast has a heavier weighting toward electricity, not surprising given we have a much higher air conditioning load. Others might have a much higher cooling load, so you'd get shifts in the mix. But the magnitude of the opportunity and the economics of it are relatively consistent across regions. So let me just shift a little and say, well, so then why is this so hard to get? It's everywhere. It's economic. It aligns with a lot of the environmental forces that are at work. Why is it that we're having a challenge getting at this? And that was actually what the bulk of our second report focused on. And at a high level, if you just think about energy efficiency, it has some challenges. And I want to link this back to the point Skip made, though. It's not that we haven't been capturing it. I mean, I thought that was put very, very succinctly. The nation has been making significant gains. What we're focused on is the potential that's still there between now and 2020. Why is that remaining potential not getting captured? And part of the reason is it does require outlay. We had a lot of blowback on our first report that it was interpreted that energy efficiency is, quote, free and easy. And actually, if you read the report, we said, no, it's not free and it's not easy. It's economic. It's affordable. That's a different concept. It does require an outlay. We have to put out about $50 billion per year, plus whatever program costs would be required to capture what we talk about if we were to get the entire potential that we laid out here. Some people say that's a risk. That's a lot of money. But we usually say, yeah, but the interesting thing about it is if you deploy the money, you get the savings. There's fairly linked. So if most of the challenge is getting people to adopt this, but if they don't adopt it, they're not spending the money. So there is somewhat of a risk mitigation factor built into that. Second issue is it's fragmented. The potential is spread across more than 100 million locations and literally billions of devices. So essentially everything that consumes energy, likely has potential associated with it. And we have to think about how we do this at scale. How do we go across all of these opportunities and try to begin to extract that potential? Third challenge, it's low mind share. Not that many people wake up in the morning and think about, I'm going to save some energy today. It's just something that we sort of, mostly intuitively know is there, but it's not something that people put a lot of mind share to, and certainly don't go through the complex efforts it would take to really bring their own home and their own building to the economically optimal level of performance. And finally, it's difficult to measure. It's something that's hard to really put your hands on. If I convince my wife that we should go replace our furnaces and insulate our home and do things differently, and how would I really show that we actually saved a lot? It's hard to measure what you don't consume. You can look back and say, well, gee, last year at this time we were at this level and now we're lower. That's an indication, but then you get into the vagaries of weather and usage behaviors and many other factors that can make this challenging. Not impossible, but challenging to really assure that if I spend this money, I'm really going to get this type of payback. If I replace my refrigerator, with a higher efficiency refrigerator, did I really save money? How do I know? How do I measure that? So that's an inherent challenge associated with that. We describe these as kind of the overall barriers to energy efficiency. I'm then going to come back to another layer that also complicate this challenge. In order for us to try to get our mind around how to better understand at the actual application level the barriers and what the potential solutions are, we broke down the total potential of energy efficiency into what amounts here to 14 clusters. If you look in the report itself, we also had a very detailed curve that shows the buildup of each energy efficiency opportunity and how that stacks up in total. Since that chart's never legible, I decided not to try to throw it up today. But what we did is we took that whole array of opportunity, broke it down into these individual clusters. So, first at the industrial, commercial, residential level, and then within that, identified segments that we thought would begin to be more actionably addressed. And for each one of those, and this is a tough chart to read, but as someone once said, it rewards the patient reader. And what we did is on the far left, we laid out all the specific barriers. So we have structural barriers like agency issues and transaction barriers and pricing distortions and ownership transfer issues. So, most people understand agency. Well, if I'm renting my house and I'm not paying the utility bill, then I have less incentive to do something. Actually, ownership transfer is an even bigger issue. If I live in a house and I think I'm going to be there 2 or 3 years, I'm reluctant to make the investments that might pay back, may have an economic payback in 3 or 4 years and then pay back over the life of the home, but I might not be as motivated to make those investments. So those are structural barriers. We looked at behavioral barriers, things like risk or awareness, and do I have the information, custom and habit, or, this notion of an elevated hurdle rate that gets a lot of economic debate. The residential customer has a 40% discount rate. By the way, we looked at that, and it's even if you throw in 40% discount rate, there's still a whopping amount of this that's economic. But those are factors that are out there and have to be thought about. And then availability. Even if I want to do it, can I get it? Is it available? Are there contractors out there that know how to do it? So we took all those barriers, and then for each cluster, and this is an example of what we call a non-low income home. In other words, a moderate to upper income home. And we said, how do these barriers show up? And we profiled each of them for that specific set of barriers. And then we said, well, what can you do about it? And that's the right side. We say, well, you can do things on information. You can do things related to capital and how people are going to finance it. You can do things through codes and standards, and you can do things to build a third-party installation base. And in this case, we took an example and said, suppose I did home labelings and assessment. Suppose I required audits as part of a home ownership experience, and I actually had labels that said this house is an Energy Star, and this house is an Energy Pig, and so when you're out there buying your house, you kind of have some information, and even more so might say, and by the way, if you made these investments, here's what the return would be. That would be pretty useful. I think people would say that would give me something to understand where I might actually be able to take action. And the good news is it addresses a number of the barriers. The bad news is it doesn't address all of the barriers. And this is one of the dilemmas we have, that when we take initiatives, we will often do things that will address 1 or 2 of the barriers, but if there are 6 or 7 barriers in your way, you don't get all the way through that set of barriers, and therefore behaviors don't result in the changes that we're seeking. So, simply put, if we're going to make progress, we have to come up with a package of initiatives that address the full set of barriers. And the good news is there's lots of choices. And most of these things have been done somewhere. I mean, if you look around the nation or if you look around the globe, you can find that most of this has in some instance been piloted or tested, maybe in isolation, maybe in an aggregate way. But most of these things we know about. It's not like this is new science here. Some of the things that Skip would talk about, when you look out 2030, 2040, a whole, new set of possibilities we can get to. We took a pretty boring conventional look. This is just stuff that's out there today. It's proven, it's known, it's available. We just don't seem to find a way to do it. So it really comes down to thinking more integratively about how we put together these programs that address not only the informational barriers, but some of the behavioral barriers, the financing barriers, the availability barriers in a way that we can deliver this. And a great example of this is the low-income home weatherization program, where through the funding of the U.S. government and the participation of the community action groups, and in some cases utilities get involved. But imagine somebody shows up at your door and says, I want to do an energy audit with certified professionals, and then they're going to come and identify the economically attractive things to do. And we've got contractors lined up who can come in and perform the work. And by the way, we're going to pay for it. I don't know how many of you here would say no thanks. Some might, but the experience of the home weatherization program for low income is they have long waiting lines of people that want this done. We've got to figure out how to be equally innovative and creative in how we unlock potential, not only in the low income home weatherization, but in new homes, new buildings, higher income homes, appliances, electronics, all the way across the board. We've got to be much more creative. And my last point on this is it isn't going to be a single party that does that. It has to be a comprehensive approach to energy efficiency. We use this little puzzle diagram, and if we're talking to a utility, we put in a bunch of dot points as to how they should think about it. If we're talking to regulators, we translate it for them. If it's for government, we translate it for them. I just tried to elevate it at a higher level to just hit the main points. But, there's we call out 6 building blocks, and the top 3 are kind of the what to do, and the bottom 3 are a little bit in the how to do it, but you need all 6 pieces. So you have to have the potential analysis. That's a great starting point. A lot of good studies out there. These are things that can be done relatively quickly, but what is the potential? Let's not talk about what's been captured. Let's not talk about existing problems. Start from a clean sheet of saying, how much is out there, and let's understand where it is and the economics. Then you got to translate that to customer and business implications. Okay, if I'm a utility, what does that mean to my bottom line earnings? I need to understand that because I have stewardship responsibilities to my shareholders. If I'm a industrial customer or a residential customer, if I'm a regulator, what does it mean for rates? Do rates go up? Do rates go down? It varies across regions depending on the unique economics. Bills will go down. Rates might go up. They might go down. They might evolve over time. But these are things that you have to understand. What are the implications if we were able to capture this? What's the regulatory and legislative strategy? What role do we need to play as regulators and legislators to help facilitate this capture of opportunity? If we need new utility regulations to create the right incentive alignment, okay, well, let's think about that. If we need to do other things on a legislative basis, we need to raise standards. Okay, let's think about that. But what would be the package of voluntary market-based forces relative to the supporting regulatory and legislative actions? And if you kind of get that figured out, that's a little bit more of the strategy. Then you start getting into, okay, program and delivery mechanism. How do we do this? And another sidebar conversation Skip and I are having, it's fascinating to us how little innovation has been applied to deploying energy efficiency. When this low-income weatherization program, we do a house at a time. We wait for people to queue up, and then we say, okay, we'll go over there and we'll do a house, and then we'll go over there. Why don't we do neighborhoods? Why don't we bring the same lean practices and business innovation that we bring to every other aspect of our industrial society? Why don't we apply that to energy efficiency? And when you start talking about deployments in some states, 400 or 500 million a year, this matters. This can be significant in further improving the economics. Organization and capabilities. Who's going to drive this? Who has the skill sets to organize programs of this scale that understand energy economics, that can be held accountable for the deployment in an efficient and effective way? Where do we have those capabilities? The answer today is we largely don't have them in an integrated way that we can grasp them, but they're not that hard to create. We could do it if we put our mind to it. And then finally, and perhaps the most important and the most challenging, stakeholder alignment. How do we get all the parties to sit around the table and agree that this is in the best interest, that this is truly a win-win for the customers, the energy providers, the suppliers, the politicians, that this is something that if we do it right can really be powerful, but we have to get people aligned. And if we continue to, for example, to only gauge utility progress on rates, and yet we want people to invest a little up front that's going to reduce our bills, we got a problem. So we've got to think about how we get this alignment in a way that pulls people together. So those are my perspectives. I'll now turn it over to Marilyn.
Can you hear me back there? Is this working? All right. Thanks so much. A great turnout. Wonderful to have everyone here this afternoon. I wanted to begin by acknowledging that there are three foundations that have supported the research that I'll be reporting on: the Energy Foundation, Turner Foundation, and Kresge Foundation. And in addition, there's a whole suite of colleagues who have been working with me. I've acknowledged the institutions across the bottom here: Oak Ridge National Laboratory and Duke University. But I also have a stable of very smart graduate students. I'd like them to raise their hand who are helping me. Come on, Ben and Lizzie and Joy, yeah, all those who have been working with me on this effort. Thank you so much. I am going to focus on the South in particular and where we are, what the opportunity is, what steps we might want to take. I'm going to begin by claiming that the lifestyles that we enjoy in the South are highly energy and carbon intensive. They're carbon intensive because of the nature of the fuels that we use, a bit more coal-dominated power production, and also because of sprawl and gasoline and long journeys to work. We're a little bit different from the rest of the United States, too, in that the South is highly industrialized. So when you look at the four sectors of energy consumption, residential, commercial, industrial, you'll see this large bar of industrial use, which is somewhat distinctive to the South and transportation. I would also like to conjecture that the South is one of the last regions to develop an energy efficiency culture. And it's really hard to prove this in definitively and quantitative ways, so I've picked a few bits of evidence that I think contribute to this conclusion. One is on the left side there from a recent Gallup, a recent newsletter from the Gallup. It was part of a Gallup poll, and this woman, Yulia Shamoya, presented the results of two questions that are about how would you like to see your energy supply? Should we drill, and how much more should we regulate and incentivize conservation? If you look at the answers of the respondents from the South, you'll see that they have the largest commitment to expanding exploitation, mining, and drilling, and the construction of new power plants of any region, and also the least commitment to investing in more efficiency. The South has the lowest rate of market penetration of Energy Star appliances. So when you go into the EPA database and look at where these appliances are being purchased, lowest rates in the South. And also, if you look at Energy Star designated homes, the lowest penetration rate as well. So it's fairly convincing body of evidence that we are different down here. We don't have that culture. We also don't have the policies and the programs in place to try to motivate investments in efficiency. As Ken and Skip have been saying, we need a different kind of mindset. Investments are required. On a per capita basis, utility energy efficiency programs in the South are 1/5 the national average. I just used a couple of illustrative maps here. On the left side is a map which shows those states that have established a renewable or energy efficiency portfolio standard for their power production, that is requiring a certain percentage of production be either from renewables or efficiency or combined heat and power. And on the right side is a map that shows those states that have passed regulations that decouple the relationship between a utility's profits and their sales. And you'll see that there are no decoupled states in the South. So right now there is truly often a disincentive for utilities to help their customers consume less because they receive their profits from as it relates to capital investment in power production. We need a level playing field. We should get as much of a return on investment to investing capital and helping us all save energy. So in order to try to ascertain the size of the energy efficiency opportunity here in the South, we did a meta review. A grad student and I, Jess Chandler, looked at 19 studies of the energy efficiency potential that touched on the South, either national, regional, or state studies. And they all use different methodologies. So in a sort of attempt to standardize them in order to be able to average across them, it was very complicated and a difficult study. I refer you to the document here in the Georgia Tech Working Paper Series to show exactly how we did it. But what we concluded is that there is a tremendous potential in the residential electricity sector alone, a 12% maximum achievable potential for efficiency. So what this diagram does, it steps through the types of efficiency potential that analysts measure. And these 19 studies tend to focus on one or a few of these definitions of efficiency potential. The top dash diagram is the Energy Information Administration's 2008 forecasted growth for the South. By the way, the South in our analysis is D.C. and Maryland all the way through Texas. The magenta line is the achievable, a modest, let me see if I got that right, I'm sorry. Let me start with the biggest drop. That's the technical potential. That's what we have the capability in terms of technologies to do in terms of reductions of energy consumption. The red line is the economic potential for energy efficiency, and that's the potential that Ken and the McKinsey and group and company estimates. So it does not take into account the fact that you can't always capture that entire economic potential. And the other two lines, the green and the magenta, are different levels of policy intervention that we feel would be needed to generate some movement and transformation of the marketplace. If you just look at the maximum achievable potential line, you'll see a 12% possible reduction by 2020. When you look at all of the sectors, residential buildings, commercial buildings, and industry, which are the three that we studied, they each have a sizable reduction opportunity. And in this case, we're just focusing in this chart on electricity, but we also looked at natural gas. If you extend this out to 2020, it's about a 1% a year drop that's possible, and it results in a level of consumption in 2020 that's no greater than today. So lots of implications for that in terms of planning our energy production capacity. But there are so many barriers. This is a typology of barriers that was the result of a study done for the Energy Policy Act of 2005 that I helped to finish up with the Department of Energy. We identified 20 kinds of barriers, and some of those barriers are not barriers that exist in the marketplace because of some of them are based on incomplete information, and some of the structural market problems like the principal agent problem and the ownership transfer problem, but others actually are a result of fiscal policies and regulations that are inconsistent with the promotion of clean energy technology investments. So some of them are problems that we've actually created for ourselves, which are particularly interesting to a policy analyst or geek like myself. So what we're doing now is we're looking at what kinds of policies might be able to move technologies into the marketplace in the South. what are our biggest opportunities. And here's a table of the policies that we are analyzing using the nation's principal modeling tool, the National Energy Modeling System. It's the NIMS is a very advanced and sophisticated modeling tool. There are only 2 universities in the country that can use it, Duke and Georgia Tech. So we are plodding our way through the line-by-line Fortran code with the help of a computer programmer here. So these are the policies that we're evaluating, and we've taken the concept of a supply curve, as McKinsey has so effectively used it in identifying technology opportunities, and we're now applying it to evaluate policy opportunities in the energy efficiency area. So you have on the x-axis the magnitude of the reduction of energy that could be achieved by a policy, and on the y-axis you have the levelized cost of producing that reduction. So in this case, we're looking at a amalgam of electricity, natural gas, and fuel oil, a few other petroleum fuels. So we have to, unfortunately, report it in a very user-friendly manner, which is dollars per million BTU. Like to report terms and kilowatt hours when it's a single fuel, but when you blend them together, you're stuck with BTUs. Nonetheless, if you take my estimated retail cost of a BTU in the South, for granted, in the year 2020, you can see that the policies that drive in efficiency that are below that line are numerous, sizable, and highly cost-effective. I particularly like the term that McKinsey has developed, which is NPV positive. It gives it that nice business grounding. Net present value positive. I like to say cost-effective and profitable, and good for your pocketbook, but NPV positive. All of those policies are NPV positive. If you look just at electricity, this analysis that we have spent 6 to 8 months conducting, there's a draft. Somebody should change note there because we're not quite in the publication mode. Shows a big potential in the industrial area. That's the 2 blue bars that involve either retrofitting the utilities, the motor and drive, compressed air, steam systems at plants across the South, or going in for the more significant process revolutionary changes in the steel making and aluminum, and particularly in the energy-intensive industry. So very affordable and can drive a lot of power out of the marketplace. A few of our policies didn't make the cost-effective line. Expanded weatherization just barely made it. Well, I want to conclude by sharing with you the conclusion that based on this body of evidence, there is an enormous potential for profitable efficiency in the South. And efficiency should be considered the first fuel. It's good for the economy. It's good for the environment. You can save water. You can save the air. You can save on your utility bills. The problem is that there are so many barriers, and it appears as though in many instances when people talk about efficiency, their commitment is more rhetorical than real. It doesn't follow up with that investment from the pocketbook, from the shareholders. We need targeted policies to overcome these barriers, and that's the challenge that I think we face in the South. Try to figure out how government can provide a effective business case so that the marketplace can be unleashed. I think we're going to spend the next little bit talking with you. I hope you all have saved up question.
Test. Yeah.
I'm going to open this up. I have a twofold question to the gentleman from McKinsey. First of all, how much resistance do you get if you promote these energy savings and potentials that there are there from companies who try to sell energy? It means the producers of energy who try to sell as much as they can to keep their revenues up. And second of all, when you showed the cost or the improvements that we can get from out of this, did you take into account health issues through, the environment gets worse and worse? And did you take that into account?
Mike, so I guess we're on. This is the first question that we get kickback from utilities. We did get a lot of reactions to the first report. Not so much that people disagreed with the content of the report, they disagreed with the way it was funded in public debate. So that there's a strong aversion to the idea that energy efficiency is free. But the second report actually was much better received. And in part we had some very credible sponsors. Having Southern Company, having Exxon, a few of the folks that you don't tend to think of as being the leading energy efficiency advocates, right? Having them weigh in on the report gave them sort of a lot of credibility in terms of the fact base that went underneath it. So I don't think, we're losing ground with utilities when we talk about the underlying economics. They're coming around that. Where the difference, and actually where we would agree with them, is the whole question comes down to how you pass to this. And if you ask utilities to go do this, when they have shareholders to represent, when they have investments to represent, they don't have confidence in the systems that are out there. They're understandably not going to do things that you might otherwise want them to do. And that's my whole point. You got to have a line. I personally think utilities are extremely well to get the right experience. Quickly on your second question, we do not try to value the reduce emissions, although certainly you could count those in as well.
I'd like to amplify what Ken said. He's exactly right. But I want to talk to you from the European perspective, because that's where some of my work is. Baum, Utrecht, and others. They see this efficiency thing much differently than we do in the United States. They see it as a competitive edge, if you will, even a wedge. I'm dealing with a number of U.S.-based firms, everywhere from Intel to IBM and the like. And their European-based operations see this as an opportunity to compete with their own U.S.-based corporations. And I see it so much more broadly as a room to step up to the plate and make the critical investments in ways that we're still reluctant to do. So from a strictly economic standpoint, to reinforce what Ken's saying, this may be a vital resource, and that we may be outcompeted if we don't step up our latest efforts.
The energy efficiency stuff that you had in your report is very useful, but I saw in the slides that you're still sort of organizing them as industrial sector, commercial sector, and residential sector. Those benefits might be much smaller compared to what you might get if you draw horizontal lines across them, whereas, for example, everything that the industrial sector throws away could pretty much supply everything that is needed in the commercial sector, and then the commercial sector, what that throws away would supply what is needed in the residential sector. The individual energy efficiency improvements that you're talking about are just a few percent here and there, whereas if you reorganize the total utilization portfolio, you might reap substantially higher benefits than that. That's just one example. The industrial sector uses much higher grade energy and therefore throws away a lot of high grade waste, which is enough for supplying all the commercial needs and so on.
Those issues of waste cascading and putting recycled energy to use are really important, and unfortunately the current modeling tools don't allow us to model them very effectively. Almost have to be done entirely offline and at least in the large scale.
This is a question, I suppose, mainly for Skip, but perhaps Dr. Brown might want to speak to it. I'm interested in how this plays out in the public sector, and the political realm, but in particularly the media was, following the Waxman-Markey bill, and there was a House labeling requirement on the bill, and then I'm listening to Fox Business. And some fella named Stuart Varney starts talking about how this is socialism and turning it into a very different thing. It's not even what's in the bill. And I guess I wonder, how, with what's happening in the media, and then you have a bunch of competing interests who may spin it one way or another way depending on what their interests are. I was interested that your jigsaw puzzle didn't include that, and wondered where that. How that plays into implementing these things.
Not only the invisibility, but the sociability, how to then bring forward and explain to the institutions that have to make it at all possible and available in different ways. And that's not something that we're particularly used to doing particularly well or comfortable in doing. So new institutions, new regulatory practices, new programs, in order to overcome that notion of a sociability or the socialist aspect of these resources. There's work that needs to be done, and it's a hard work ahead, but it's a critical resource. Finally, I think it can be brought to better attention if we finally realize that this is a huge productive resource that has been hard work, has been undervalued, and that can be doing a lot more if we think of it smartly rather than reactive kind of concept. So a lot more needs to be done on the communication, on the measurement, and on the institutional contractual measures that really bring it to market, whether we're talking decoupling or other sorts of measures that provide incentives.
If I could add also, if we can create a market for energy efficiency investments, for instance, in the European Union, they have the White Certificates program, which helps contribute to their Kyoto goals. And here we could be trading in energy efficiency certificates too, in those states where they have portfolio standards. And once it becomes a marketable item, I think that it'll be more acceptable when there's a dollar placed on it and you can trade it, and we'll find better ways to produce them too, produce those efficiency credits.
Just one other thing I'd add on to this. This has been a very interesting question that comes up a lot to us about, do you try to do this through market forces? Do you drive it through government regulation and intervention? And of course we're not policy based firm. We try to stay a little bit clear of that. But just a couple things to think about. On this whole notion of home inspections, you could debate that is intrusive and government shouldn't be anywhere near that. you could say the same thing about automotive vehicle emission inspections. You know, is that something that we support or don't support? You know, there's lines that you can draw on this, but we do have models where we do this, and you know, we do require people to wear seatbelts. So there are certain things that you say for a social good, we put some requirements on. Where's the line? That's an interesting debate. But I'll give you another example too. We have a very mixed model of how we socialize cost in the energy world. If a big neighborhood or a new expansion of a city came up in your utility franchise and they had to build new supply plants to meet that need, you are all going to socialize that cost. Make no mistake about it. It is going to be embedded in your rates. When we build a power plant, we don't assign it to the new people. We spread that cost, right? On the other hand, if we went and took a bunch of dollars and we went and spent it on this neighborhood to make their homes more efficient, but we didn't make your home more efficient, people would scream that that is some type of socialism, and why did you benefit them and not us? Well, the interesting thing is you did benefit everybody. You made an investment. You might have gotten 500 megawatts of demand at a lower price than if you had to build 500 megawatts of supply. But we are not geared. We don't have the legal precedent, the historical precedent, the mindset to socialize demand-side costs the way we do supply-side costs. So just interesting to reflect on.
I want to add one comment to build on some of the very good work that McKinsey's done. One of the brilliant things they've helped us wrestle with is some new terminology. The MPV positive, for example, or energy productivity instead of energy intensity or efficiency. That resonates better. Similarly, to get away from the socialist aspect, we need to have better phrases and better ways of communicating things like energy audit. Who the hell wants to have anything of theirs audited? That scares away a lot of people, so there needs to be a much more proactive communication of these ideas to help break through those barriers as well.
These are two questions from the web, from our participants over the web. I think the first question is to you, Ken. In the analysis, to what extent did McKinsey consider the rising cost of fuel, or the fluctuation of fuel costs, I suppose, in savings analysis?
For the projection of fuel costs, we used the government projection. So we stayed with the baseline that was projected in there. We did have the modeling capability to look at sensitivities around that. It doesn't move it as much as you might think. We also looked at variability around capital cost, commodity cost, but just for the report that we issued, to answer the question succinctly, we used the government projections of fuel costs.
We've been looking at alternative scenarios of the future where there is a price on carbon, which of course raises the price of fossil fuels. And what we found, not surprisingly, is that if you have a future with carbon constraints and these higher prices, energy efficiency helps to moderate the inflation of energy prices that would occur with these other policies. So it's even better in a high-priced energy world.
The second question, I think, speaks to the notion of what, negawatts, and just the question specifically is: would you speak to specific successful programs, statewide programs on energy conservation, and what those experiences might look like?
Well, I don't want to Californicate the discussion by any means, but they have done some interesting things over the years, dating all the way back to the Santa Barbara oil spill, which is where a lot of that motivation was originally started. And then they had some very aggressive pioneers and champions. One of our founders of our organization, Art Rosenfeld, who is now an emeritus board member in Maryland, who, by the way, had to step down because she's been nominated as a PBA commissioner, so we look to see some things there. But let's talk about what California is doing that's interesting. Their per capita electricity use is much smaller than the average in some very interesting ways, partly because they were early on willing to adopt some very aggressive codes and standards with regard to buildings and appliances. They were very early on willing to pull together some really meaningful programs that helped explain and help provide education to architects and to realtors and real estate agents and the like, getting out to the network of people and if you will, adopting, not unlike the old Ag Extension program, working with people in the field where they live and really generating a rapport and a culture, if you will, that appreciated this as an opportunity for the state as a whole. To that extent, California has been number one on our scorecard. Perhaps some of you have seen in Time magazine last year our energy state scorecard. The state's ranked in that regard. And yes, I'm sorry to say the South is pretty much as Marilyn depicted it. But that's a huge opportunity. That's the way I look at it. So California, in the sense of being willing to be proactive, reaching out, working at all levels of people have to be part of that decision, and then making it more easily understood, and they've decoupled. They've given the utilities, PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, Southern California Edison, the incentive to go out and draw a return on making their customers much more value added and able to save them money as well.
And there are some good programs in the South, although the South did get 10 of the 16 Ds on the report card. Texas got an A. They were the only A in the South, if you broadly define the South. But the North Carolina State Energy Office has wonderful programs that reach out to an industry and have achieved some of the best results there. The state of Kentucky has a wonderful schools program and have been promoting geothermal heat pumps in their schools. Florida also is tinkering with various energy goals and renewable portfolio standards. So we may, in fact, be seeing the shrinkage of the South as we are surrounded by increasingly progressive actions that will make it more and more difficult for us to not act, I hope.
I'd actually like to ask one question. There's been a lot of discussion from, in response to many of these questions about decoupling. Decoupling has its own issues, including measurement certainly being one of the big ones. Can you speak at all to the relative success of decoupling programs so far and things that might improve them?
To give Marilyn and Ken a chance to think a bit more about it, I'll just open up this thought that if you take a look at those states that have decoupled, they tend to be among the states that are high on our scorecard ranking. In other words, viewing efficiency as a critical resource that the utilities can indeed invest in. Investing in their customers has had a fairly significant impact. That's not to say that the way it's been done necessarily is the optimal. We're still learning. But what I see happening so often is that people want such a fine-grained certainty that they're fearful of acting at all, when I think we need to be a bit more entrepreneurial and say, yes, it takes money to make money, and we need to learn. Let's begin moving out and encouraging investments, but immediately begin learning so we can fine-tune whether we're talking decoupling, we're talking other deployment programs, what have you.
Yeah, we have looked at decoupling and other forms of utility regulation quite closely, and when I step back from it, I would say the objective. Come back to the objective. The objective is to remove the utility disincentive from deploying energy efficiency at scale. Then the means, there are multiple ways of doing that, and there have been some decoupling examples that appear to work. There have been some that have miserably failed, because depending on how you structure the decoupling, you can open up to have a whole lot of effects enter in that quote decouple, and then people start to get upset because economic conditions fell off and the utilities continue to generate a lot of revenue, and they say, gee, that wasn't the intent. So I think we have to be very careful to jump to the conclusion that the only way to remove a disincentive is through decoupling. You can do things through, up in, Jim Rogers is promoting the save-a-watt concept, or virtual power plant, where he basically gets the ability to deploy capital at a reduced percentage of what a new plant would cost, and he gets which puts a limit on how much he can spend. He's got to capture a certain amount of investment benefit, and then he gets a higher rate of return though for that capital that he deploys. So while he's going to spend less capital, and some might say that's from a utility mindset not a good thing, he can get a slightly higher return on that capital to compensate in part for some of the risk and the uncertainty that they'd be taking. You can do this through shared savings programs. You can do it through if you just address things like the fixed variable spread of how utility rates are structured. So I would just say, you don't have to go decoupling to get the benefit of what we're really trying to get at, which is removing this incentive.
So the fact is that we're going to see increasing investments in efficiency in the future, and the utilities can be part of that business opportunity, or they can suffer the consequences, which means lower sales. One way or the other, we are moving toward a more efficient economy, and I would argue that we should encourage our utilities to become part of the business solution because they are uniquely situated. They have information about all of us. They know a lot about what our energy needs are. They bill us monthly. They could bill us for a little efficiency premium that would actually result in no larger bills over the long run because we're investing in cost-effective efficiency. I think that we want to see utilities as part of the solution, and to do that, they need to get a profit. They need to be able to make a profit and find out how, find a way to allow that to occur. And in my new, if confirmed, TVA board position, I'm going to be trying to figure out how one does that with the nation's largest public power provider, where they're not making profits, but they do have a bit of a debt to pay off, a $28 billion debt. So they are revenue driven too, and that business model I don't think works.
Ken, I noticed your study focused solely on stationary energy sources, non-transportation. But could you touch briefly on efficiency in transportation, particularly when you have a 35-40% efficient engine? Seems like there's some low-hanging fruit there.
Your observation is correct. This report focused on stationary energy sources, so specifically we did not look at automotive vehicles in this report. In the greenhouse gas report, we did look at the transportation sector pretty closely. Just a couple thoughts on that. It's a great point to bring up. One thing we need to keep in mind is that electricity is not inherently bad, right? I mean, if you move toward electric vehicles, you would actually increase the consumption of electricity, but you might in fact be more energy efficient because you're displacing another carbon-based fuel source. So we shouldn't sort of label electricity as bad. It can actually be used to help us, and has helped us become a more efficient and productive society. Another interesting fact is that the amount of efficiency that we identified, the 20% roughly by 2020, that amount of efficiency improvement is equivalent to what we would consume if we had every single vehicle in the U.S. powered by electricity. So, it's roughly, it would be about 20% growth if we just did it on top of what we do, and we said about a 20% reduction. So you can see we could take all this consumption out of our buildings and use it to power our vehicles, and we'd be generally better off, and then you get into you got to also address the carbonization of the source of the electricity. But this is an area where I think we're going to see some progress over time. We got to wait and see the battery costs have to come down. The alternative powertrain costs have to come down. We're not quite at a point where it is economically NPV positive to get all the way there. But I think in the next 5-10 years you're going to see a lot of progress on that.
I might just amplify on that a bit, again, going back to the European operation, but I absolutely agree with what Ken just said. Longer term, two things. One is that we may be shifting the pattern of commuting, driving, of vehicle miles, ton miles required, which would be a huge contribution. For example, not too long ago I went to Sweden, gave a 2-hour discussion, really highly productive, very interactive, very fun, and I did it by video conferencing. I saved all that fuel, and that's only going to accelerate. So that's just but one of many examples of things to come. I'm talking with manufacturers now who are developing smaller scale, essentially profitable production capabilities that can be housed in commercial buildings, that you can produce things closer to where things are actually needed, saving on warehousing and transportation over the long haul. That's going to begin shifting a whole different pattern of transportation demand. I would also like to let people know, again, with the European edge, a number of automobile manufacturers, Daimler, General Motors, and others, have hooked up with some major energy companies, Vattenfall and Total and others. The Berlin Agreement, which was signed in September of last year, where there's going to be a huge commitment to put in hydrogen fuel cell infrastructure in Germany that may give them a real leg up, and we are asleep at the wheel. We need to wake up to those possibilities. They're a little bit closer than we think. The Europeans are acting on it much more aggressively.
Maybe I have time for one more question.
What are some of the better sources of information on energy efficiency, best business practices, and technologies? For industrial, commercial, and all the rest.
I would recommend that folks visit the National Governors Association's Best Practices unit. They're doing some pretty interesting work. A woman by the name of Sue Gander, her email address is sgander, Gander, at nga.org, and look at what they're doing. I would also suggest that you take a look at our scorecard on the ACEEE website, acEE.org, which really does lay out the different ranking of the states and what they're doing to earn that number one scoring. I might say we give 50 points to the top state. California got 48.5. If we're going to deal with the energy imperative and the climate imperative, we need to be thinking more like 250 or 300 points, not just 50. But that will give you at least a starting sense of what the different states are doing to earn those kind of rankings. So a combination National Governors Association, their Best Practices unit, and then the scorecard on the acEE.org website.
We do have a representative of the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance here. If you'd raise his hand, please. There you are, John Sibley. And they are involved in a Southeast Industrial Efficiency Alliance of companies across the region that are going to be, that have been involved in talking about what kinds of technology solutions are available and how to help make them happen. So that'd be a good connection for you.
No, I think those are good sources. You might look at the EPA, their Energy Star. They've got a lot of good information there. So that would be another place to check out.
Thank you very much for attending today's session. I'd like to remind you that the archive copy of today's session is on secleanenergy.org. The PowerPoints as well as the audio portion is on that website. I'd also like to thank our distinguished panel. Please give them a round of applause. Have a good day.